So we're gathered here today because we have a common passion and we have a common problem. And our passion is about food justice, about feeding the hungry, about finding a sustainable way to feed the world into the future. And we're also interested in how faith relates to all of those different things. The problem of our global food system affects everyone in the world. It is a broken system with a very limited timeline ahead of it. The Green Revolution began to meet the needs, the perceived need of a growing population in the world that was going to need more food. And so inventors and policymakers and farmers got together and they came up with technology to solve this problem by increasing yields, production per acre in this country. And they focused on some basic commodities and they genetically engineered them and they used fossil fuels to a great degree, creating petrochemicals and pesticides and chemical fertilizers in order to fuel this large increase in production, with the idea that we were going to feed the hungry of the world this way. As we know, all these years later, there are still 850 million hungry people in the world, 10 million of whom die every year. There's still the same number of hungry people today in this country, the same percentage of the population that there was 30 years ago when all of this was starting. So we know that this system has not achieved what it promised to achieve. And worse than that, it contributes to global climate change and the destruction of our environment. Because of this system, we have set ourselves on a course to meet our end. If we continue to create agriculture at this level with technology and reliant on finite resources, we'll come to a point where there is no turning back, where the population of the world won't have enough farmers left in it to continue to farm once the population is large enough and the fossil fuels disappear. That is the timeline of our end that we are facing. But it's not just our future in which this system is a problem. We are suffering from our broken global food system today. I already mentioned the number of hungry people in the world who suffer. There's an overproduction of food that goes to waste or is processed and turned into processed foods which are not healthy for our consumption. Part of the Green Revolution was to subsidize this large-scale commodity overproduction, which created a falsely low price for food commodities. These commodities, when dumped on the international market, then lowered international prices as well, destroying the ability of small farmers in this country and around the world to be able to compete at that level, making more hungry farmers in the world. Our global food system directly relates or connects to that hunger, causes that hunger in the world today. But it also causes obesity. Because of these processed foods and the need to take these excess commodities that are so cheap and somehow put them into foods that they used to not be in, we'll find that most of the foods in our grocery stores contain either corn, soy, or wheat, the three commodities that are largely produced throughout the Midwest and are overproduced. Because of that, we've seen an increase, a doubling of the rate of obesity in this country among adults in the last 30 years, and a tripling among children. The health of the children in our country is declining. This generation of children today are the first generation in American history to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. This is a vital, vital issue that affects the people, that affects us as well as our children. One in 6 children in America are hungry, and 4 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in this country are caused by our diet. The link between hunger and obesity exists not only around the world, but in our country as well. Another part of the problem of our global food system is justice. The fact that the negative effects of this system most specifically affect the poor. The poor around the world who lack access to food and are hungry, and the poor in our country who suffer and are consuming these processed foods because they don't have access to or not able to afford the expensive, high-quality foods, fruits and vegetables. And because of that, it's leading to a higher cause of death among the poor. So it's a justice issue as well. So we understand the problem. It's not new to us. That's why we're here. Most people know to some extent what's going on, and yet their eyes are closed to this finite timeline that we have with our food system. So we need to find a way to motivate not just ourselves, but motivate our society, motivate people around the world to be actively engaged in the change that needs to happen. I think it's good to think about what motivates us as individuals. Why are we here today? Why are we passionate about changing the world? I know I'm motivated by my faith, by Jesus' call to love and serve God and each other, and by the calling that we all have to be caretakers of this creation. But whatever your sense of calling is related to this, you can connect with other people who share that same calling, but you also need to be able to see in someone else who's different than you what motivates them or what has the potential to motivate them. And one of the failures that we've had in terms of trying to help subsistence farmers around the world is in understanding what motivates them. Faith is a huge motivating factor for most of the rest of the world. Even though our society is much more secular, we need to realize that other societies are not that way. And faith is a way that we can connect with people and help them to understand their own motivation and their own calling to this work. When I was a missionary in South Sudan, I worked with subsistence farmers. And what I found was that subsistence farmers, even when you tell them that this new technique is not going to cost them any money and is going to create higher yields for them, they're not likely to try it because it's different, but also because of the way they see themselves. Subsistence farmers are used to going without, not having enough. They're used to being the lowest of the low in society. They're used to not having a choice. They're used to disease and to poverty and to despair. You take someone in that frame of mind and you tell them something to do to change, and change is not likely going to happen. But if you help that person discover their own personal calling and value, it changes the way that they see the world, it changes the way that they see themselves, and it gives them the strength that they need to do the work ahead of them. It was amazing to start these sessions with a Bible study. People were confused because they were used to a foreigner coming in and saying, okay, here's what you need to do. And instead, it was a Bible study asking them what they thought about certain passages in the Bible. The passage that Bishop Ndudu mentioned from Genesis about Adam and Eve being placed in the garden, both to till it, but also to keep it, to be both caretakers as well as farmers, is usually where I would start. And other passages about being caretakers of creation and understanding that as the primary and first responsibility and calling of humanity. When subsistence farmers could see themselves as being called by God to an honorable profession, you'd see a light come on. And all of a sudden people would start asking more questions. Well, what about this? And what about this? We'd look at other passages. There's a passage from Job, chapter 12, verses 7 to 10, if you're interested, that talks about learning from creation. It says, ask the trees, ask the birds and the fishes of the sea, what among these does not know what the hand of the Lord has done for them? We use that as an example of saying, God didn't just create the world and then walk away. God continues to create and renew and evolve the earth, and us as well. And we are to be participants with God in that process. And God has already given us the answers that we need for how to do this, how to farm sustainably. It's written in creation. The earth was created as a sustainable, self-renewing thing. So when farmers begin to see that not only are they called to be caretakers, but God has already given them the answers, that means they don't need me to tell them what techniques to use, though I usually do give some suggestions as well. They are empowered themselves to go out and to look in the landscape around them and find out, where are the wild plants growing the best? Why are they growing well there? How can I make that a part of my farm? That allows farmers to be more innovative, but also to be more adaptable, both to changing climate conditions around the world, but also increased population, decreased land size, increase of disease, which causes people not to have enough energy to grow food, helps farmers to come up with innovative solutions to these problems themselves, not requiring someone from outside to tell them. The change that we need to make, the motivation that we get people to look at, is really twofold. It comes from the grassroots, from these subsistence farmers that I've been talking about, who are 90% of the population in most countries in Africa are subsistence farmers. And that is where the most hunger is as well. But also the grassroots level everywhere. And that's what we are, the grassroots level. Each of you interested in working in the different areas that you've been called to work in. No matter what your profession is, if you're a librarian or a teacher or a writer, everybody has a sphere of influence in which they can act. Everyone has friends and neighbors and people that they can have conversations with, always raising up and elevating these issues. And when we work together, so much more can happen. It's going to take a lot of creativity. It's going to take mobilizing of resources. And it's going to take people being committed, more and more people, to actually participate in the work of small-scale sustainable, small-scale sustainable organic farming. We need more community-supported agriculture programs. We need more small farms. We need more people growing gardens in schools and at organizations and on the balconies of their apartments. Everyone can be involved in growing healthy food. And that healthy food can make an impact in our country and around the world. By creating models at the local level, we create the inspiration that can then drive policy as well. Because that's the other part that's important. Not just working at the grassroots level, but looking at policy change. Subsidies for large-scale commodities are still in place, continuing to create these destructive global environments. And we can do something to change that if we work together, and we work with organizations that are making a change in those areas. Just imagine if instead small-scale, organic, sustainable farming was subsidized. All of a sudden, these healthy foods would be available to people. We could combat obesity as well as hunger in this country. And around the world, the same is true. If subsistence farmers are able to increase their production by simple techniques, just using resources that are already there, organic material that's already around their farm, composting and mulching. And I'll talk more about those techniques and give you more resources about that later. But simple techniques that can be used to increase production. And once they increase production, they can afford to buy health care, education for their children. They can afford to pay taxes. And all of a sudden, a country that was unstable and involved in conflict can find peace, can find stability and development, and is able to move forward in a way that's productive, both for their country and for their region. All this can happen through subsistence farmers who currently feed the world and can do an even better job of doing that. The policy that needs to drive that as well is looking at, instead of distributing tractors necessarily, look at the way that those tractors are used. Look at encouraging communities to work together, to form farming groups, to purchase larger technology, or to work together on each other's farms, to be trained by local people in this motivation for change, not just in the techniques themselves. All of us working together, subsistence farmers and large-scale farmers, lobbyists, writers, and teachers, and organizers, all working together, each with our own gifts and with our own calling. Together we can change the world. Together we can reverse this broken system and make it a healthy system that can feed the world in a healthy way, sustainably. We need to be creative, and we need to expect miracles, because we can do all things through God who strengthens us.